Okay, looks like most people in. Good afternoon, how are we? Oh, wow, that good. I know it's day 2, but come on. How are the feet holding up? You got achy feet, achy brains? Yeah. Just nice to have a sit down, isn't it? That's good, brilliant. So I've been doing Learning Tech a few years actually, and there's a couple of things I've noticed is, number one, you'll spend the first 5 minutes thinking, have I made the right choice? Is this the one I want to be in? So the good news is yes. But the second and most important bit is that these rooms are nearly soundproof from each other. But in a minute, when I do a proper hello, you're going to go so loud that everybody in the other rooms is going to be going, oh, I knew I should have been in Theatre 1, right? So we're going to create the biggest sense of FOMO that this building has ever had, right, from the other 3 rooms. So I'm just warning you that in a minute I'm going to say hello again, and I want you to just go, yay, and clap and cheer and go wild and just really annoy the hell out of everybody else. That's basically my mission for this afternoon. Okay, so we'll just wait for those couple more people to sit down, and then we'll do that. And then we'll see if anybody else picks up on what we're doing and tries to retaliate. And then we'll just go back and forth for the next hour, and then we'll take it out to the car park. Okay, so fabulous. Right, we'll get this properly kicked. So what was that, sorry? Incentivize you. Yeah, okay. If you outdo the other 3 rooms, then by the end of the day, I will explain the difference between an LMS and an LXP. How's that? Is that? Fabulous. Okay. I think we're there. Right, are we ready for this? Yeah? So I'm just going to do a good afternoon Theatre 1, and you're going to go, hello, clap, cheer, whatever it is that you want to do to be really, really loud, all right? So that's it. Let's take it down. Let's get us centered. Take a deep breath. Get ready. Okay. Right. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Good afternoon, Theatre 1. Yes, that's what we like. Woo! Yeah. Everyone else is thinking, I didn't know there was a TV evangelist on. Right. Good afternoon. My name is Anthony. As I mentioned, I've been coming to Learning Tech for a long time. I've been in L&D for over 20 years. I know I don't look old enough. But if there's one topic that I've seen on the rise over the last few years, it has definitely been the whole concept of data and analytics. And I think, if I'm honest, the first few years I saw this on the roster, I was somewhat disappointed with the sessions because they were all about, wouldn't it be good if? Wouldn't it be good if we got data about stuff that wasn't just completion data? Wouldn't it be good if we knew more than just who came on our courses? And so I said to Don a few years ago, I don't want to do any more of those sessions where we just talk about theoretical ideas and how wouldn't it be great if we were better at what we did. I want to do the sessions where people come along and say, do you know what? We get that, and this is what we've done about it, and this is how we've put this into practice. So I'm really, really pleased that this is going to be one of those sessions for you. As I mentioned, it's a huge hot topic. I don't know if you've seen the latest global sentiment survey, but learning data analytics number 4 this year, up from 5. It would definitely have been higher if it wasn't for that pesky artificial intelligence stuff, right? We know about that. So it's a huge topic, and I think one that is incredibly important. So over the next 70 minutes, you're going to get to hear some real stuff, so a story that happened and how it made a huge impact to one of the largest organizations that we have and one of the most critical to our infrastructure. To do that, these 3 gentlemen are going to take you along that journey. So my job really is to just introduce those, get out of the way, let them tell their story. There will be kind of reflection points throughout, so if you have a question, it will be clear when there's a good opportunity to do that. I would love to hear your views, your thoughts, and I know the guys are really keen to do that. There is also a section at the end if we haven't managed to cover what it is that you wanted to ask during the session, and we will do that for you at the end of the session. So does that all sound good? We're all happy with that? Brilliant. Okay, so let me introduce the panel first of all. So on the end there we have Guy Wilmhurst-Smith, who has been at Network Rail for 8 years. He's the, I don't want to get the title wrong here, the head of training at Network Rail, who has a team of 500 people. Who has 500 people in a training team? Okay. But before that, spent a long time in the military, so has that amazing background that he can bring to organisations. We've also have Richard Brown. Richard sat on the end here. Richard's head of strategic capability at Network Rail, who focuses on strategy and transformation, looks for innovation in what he does and tries to bring new ideas to the business. Also, having spent 12 years in the industry, prior to that, also a military background. And then we have Johnny Buckley. Johnny Buckley is a consultant, is a partner at PA Consulting, and has years and years of expertise in helping businesses really understand people, safety, and from various industries like road and rail. So together, I think they're an absolutely formidable threesome. So before I hand over to Guy, can we have a big round of applause for your panel today? Fantastic. So
Thanks,
guys,
Anthony.
you can set the scene for us and we'll have a great session.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Really good to see you here. They always say you shouldn't start a presentation with an apology, so I'll just do a reflection on it. But the last time I presented at the Learning Tech Conference was in February 2020. And I came up on stage and I was feeling really rough, if I'm honest. I didn't know at the time, but I had COVID, and I really hope that if any of you were there then, I was not the super spreader that handed it all on to you. Because we've seen a huge amount of change as a result of COVID. And I don't know about any of your L&D businesses, but in mine, for example, 80% of our sort of leadership and professional development type of training is now done on Teams, and it's pretty seamless. We'd wanted to do that for years, right? But getting people into the virtual space was extremely difficult culturally. And we've seen as much as that theme of Teams enabling a lot of this technology, but also in parallel, we've seen a cultural change occur side by side. And that's one of the things that I want to sort of get across on our journey with learning analytics. It is part a journey on technology. And if you'd asked me 3 years ago, in my mind, it was all about technology. All right. What we've learned over that time is that culture, hell's teeth, we should know that, but culture is also a really big driver in making learning analytics an effective tool in your business. So, if I can find the old... So, let me just, for those of you who don't know Network Rail, just a quick overview, not an advert, just an overview. Network Rail is that bit of the railway system in Great Britain that looks after the maintenance, engineering and rebuilding of the rail infrastructure. We have the train operating companies that operate it, but we do the bit that sits underneath it. 20,000 miles of track with lots of electrical and mechanical systems. It's actually a vast array of things. And that really affects us as the L&D team that looks after Network Rail, because we look after Network Rail's people, 40,000 odd people, but we also provide the design and development of training and govern it across the infrastructure side of the rail industry, some 120,000 people, including running, for example, the central system for track access for businesses like London Underground and so on. So there's a fair array of activity. So when you said we gasped at the size of the team, it's actually shrunk quite a bit because of the financial constraints in recent years. In fact, just before COVID, we were authorised to go up to about 700 plus. But one of the reasons for that is the spectrum of competence that we need to cover. It is intrinsic to the nature of the railway that we cover the spans of technology that have run for centuries. So if we were an airline industry, we would be flying hot air balloons, biplanes, Avro Lancasters, Boeing 707s, and the sort of latest fly-by-wire Airbus. And when you've got to maintain that spectrum, there is a huge amount of competence that is required across the organization. And one of the things that is fantastic is the sheer breadth and depth of skills that exists in all of our frontline workforce. And some, 80, 90% of the business with the training team is about our frontline workforce. Right? And that's what really drives our thinking. And of course, it is spread across that 20,000 miles. So, what I really wanted to do was to just share our journey today. To start, about why did we start our journey on learning analytics? What did we then develop to make that a working possibility? And what have we learnt through a program which we call our Training Intelligence Program to embed it in our organization and continue to take the next steps? I think if my view of learning analytics is that we've been doing it for a number of years now, and every year I feel as I get more ignorant rather than more knowledgeable about it, because its possibilities expand more and more, and you just realize its potential to deal with so many different issues. So for me, it started about a year before the pandemic, and I was invited by an email to go and see one of our managing directors, and I fully expected that to be a positive conversation about the level of success we were having in delivering the training that his teams needed in the southern region. And far from that, I had a very grumpy managing director. He was not happy, all right? Even though I pointed out that they had asked for this much and we had been delivering this much, it wasn't what he wanted. He was unhappy because he was getting a lot of noise from the teams about them not getting as much training as they would like. He was intrinsically unhappy that he was still getting incidents that he could see were related to people not being sufficiently skilled. And so why wasn't the training dealing with those incidences? In fact, there was lots of pockets associated with it. And we had a good chat. And in particular, I pointed out that the training that we had been delivering was a well-funded program, that we had good investment, and that everything we delivered was what each of the line managers in his organization had been delivering and had asked for. And, surely he should turn the hour around, and if the training wasn't what he wanted, he should ask for what he wants and make that clear. And he said, look, I'm not interested in that. What I recognize is that I want my front line to focus on delivering the day job. Right? They don't really know what skills they want, where, when, because they are incredibly busy trying to make sure the trains turn up on time every single day. And I need you to go away and give some thought to this and come up with a way of identifying what I really need to turn around the performance of my business, right? To solve those problems for me. And to be, he was a man who was true to his word. He didn't limit the money. He said, you can have an unlimited training budget. All you need to do is prove to me that it's going to deliver on railway performance. Right? Not tick some box on competence, but directly contribute to the performance of the business. So that took some thinking, all right? And we realized, and you see the sort of questions up there, that there were, the more you lifted off the lid, the more things you began to think about. So we then decided that we had to set out and understand what sort of problem we needed to solve. Right. And was even what he was asking us to do practically possible? Right. That journey led us to looking at the existing data that is recorded in every business, and we're no different from that one. There's delay minutes on trains, there's work bank backlog, there's the amount of money we spend on subcontractors as a result of not having the right skills. There's just a mass of it. How could we use that to start targeting what we were doing? How could we target and turn the training business from a scattergun of training activity to one that was a precision-guided weapon to hit exactly what we needed? But we had to first really understand what that link was going to be between the training that we gave and the way in which it changed performance. That led us to a set of points, points being those things that move trains between tracks, a set of points about a few miles north of Brighton. And what we can see from the data is that because of faults in that set of points, all right, in the last few months, there had been 2,000 delay minutes of trains not turning up on time because those points weren't performing correctly. So we said, okay, that's interesting. We dug into what sort of competence a person would need to make sure that those points operated correctly. We then had a look at who the maintenance teams were that actually were responsible for maintaining those areas of the railway. And then we started to look at the competence records of the individuals. And we can see from that one example that there was a strong link between a gap in the training of the individuals and the reliability of that piece of the infrastructure and the subsequent delays from the trains. And I had a good chat with the section manager. And I said, well, why have you not asked for training for this? And he said, you don't understand. The business cycle turns so quickly. I really haven't got time to think through the specific points by points, level crossing by level crossing, the thousands upon thousands of pieces of equipment I'm responsible for looking after, right? Diagnosing all of that isn't something I've got time for when I'm short of people and I need to maintain the tracks. I need to react to what I see, right? And so we started this journey where we identify all of the different areas that were causing delays in the trains. We started to look at where that had a relationship to the competence of the teams that were involved, and we created an algorithm and then a series of tools that allowed us to provide an insight to the teams about what sort of training that they could ask for that would deliver directly on their areas of business performance. And of course, we wanted to make it easy for our teams to have those conversations, so we wanted as much of that to be automated as possible. And we know that once we make those changes, we need to understand the impact of it, because once we've trained a few people, how much impact does that have on the business performance? We've predicted this much, but does it really have that impact on it? Because you can imagine that as you start to upskill all of your teams, there comes a point when one more trained person actually doesn't make any difference whatsoever. And it starts to inform the level of ambition that you have across all of your business around the skills that people need to have. Right? So that laid out why we were doing what we were doing. But of course, turning that into a reality, usable tools that are effective and can be implemented by all of your teams across the 20,000 miles of railway was a challenging ask. And hence, we brought our colleagues from PA in to help work with us to develop the understanding, the tools, and the technology. So I'll ask Johnny if you could take over from me and take the story through to the next level. Unless Any questions at this particular stage? In that case, Matey, off you go.
Brilliant. Thank you. Fantastic. Thanks very much, Guy. Hopefully that was a good, useful introduction into the complexity of the rail industry. There'll be a few bits of jargon which I'll bring to life, not too much, fortunately. And what I'm going to try and cover is, so if Guy set the scene for the why behind what was trying to be achieved, I'll try to bring to life what was done and how it was done in order to bring that to life and capture some of the successes, but also the challenges. And there's more work still to be done. This is a long journey of maturity. And then Richard will be sort of bringing us home to explain the benefits and the future of that. So, Guy mentioned the Training Intelligence Programme. Obviously, the core of it is an analytical approach to thinking about the impact of training on operational performance. But actually, it's worth thinking of it as a capability enhancement program within the training department of Network Rail. And it's really split into three areas. There's the technology element, the processes and the data analytics, and really importantly, the people element. So I'll just quickly run through those just to set the scene before I then show some relatively simple examples of bringing it to life. So the technology, over time, it's matured into, it's a Microsoft Azure-based platform. It draws in large volumes of very complex operational data sets, does a lot of cleansing and aggregating of that data, which in itself is no mean feat, and keeps that very current, because obviously the data is live. Every day it's being added to. And it pulls it into a data factory, and that gives the platform from which analytics can then be applied and decision support tools developed. So on the top right, there are a dozen plus different interfaces, decision support tools. And this is where a lot of hard work's being put into analyzing those linkages. So the first step was, if a certain thing is happening operationally, it could be the delay to trains that Guy mentioned, or it could be the engineering backlog, the to-do list to maintain this railway, or even the cost that's spent on external contractors to replace headcount because of a lack of muscle and competence, is making those links. There are several thousand different competencies. There's tens of thousands of failure modes in the industry. No one's ever linked that to what are the competencies that directly mitigate or react to those challenges. So there's a lot of work in that space. So there was a lot of stitching together data sets that were on different systems that have never talked to each other before and cleansing that data out. And it then brings it into decision support tools in predominantly Power BI and Power Up, so low-code environments, the advantage being it allows the owners of the tools, the Network Rail training team, to further develop them. They're intuitive, they're at the point of need, high fidelity, a lot of investment in UX so that they are easy to use and understand and leverage with customers. And importantly, and one of the areas perhaps that is still lots more to do on is demonstrating that feedback link. So there's a lot of thinking had to be done on, okay, so if we've linked this failure mode to these competencies and these competencies to these courses, which is it's not a one-to-one link either. We now need to predict what the impact is of, for example, increasing that training. How much might that improve an element of performance? And that's never been done before. And I think that's maybe why rail, being a complex industry, perhaps more complex in its data than some of yours in this room, it's perhaps why the rail industry has sort of paved the way in this space, because that richness of data has almost been that catalyst, that driver for let's focus on it. And I'm confident that, as Richard will summarize at the end, there's points that hopefully you'll all take away and go, actually, you can see that how that applies to your world. But the really tough bit, there's definitely more work to do, is if we've predicted and we've created an algorithm of increased training by X, and you'll see Y increase in performance, for example. Actually, how do you capture that over time, especially when there's a long lag time between making the intervention or calculating it, planning the training, delivering the training, and seeing the benefit of it? So we've done quite a bit of work on that machine learning algorithm that feeds back into it, but definitely an area for more analysis. As I say, this will cover warts and all, the successes and the headaches that continue, and some really exploratory but exciting work. And then really importantly, the bottom bit, this is a user journey for one of the users. It fundamentally changes the way the training representatives think about training and the customers think about training and competence and the service that is provided to them. So it's moving from what might have, before 2019, been a customer-supplier exchange. So training says, here's our catalogue. got lots of training. What would you like? And as Guy said, the staff are frankly too busy focusing on keeping people safe and passengers safe to think about it, and it's really hard. So it's giving them the skills to understand the data science so they can use it intelligently. It's giving them the skills to leverage the tools, but think about that connection between training investment and operational performance. You know, moving from a customer supplier to this informed supplier service. And it's also giving them, importantly, the skills to have those conversations with their counterparts in delivery, which might need to be persuasive at times. I know you're really busy, but I've done some hard thinking for you. Let me take you through it, and when you're happy, sign off, and it will turn the plan into we'll turn it into a plan. To actually challenging people, saying, I know you want that, you think you want that training, but it's not what you want, it's what you need. And that occurs both at the frontline training, I'll bring one of those examples to life, but also at the senior leadership level as well. So there's been a lot of upskilling of those skills needed to provide an informed supplier service rather than a customer-supplier exchange. Happy so far? Cool. Okay, so I'm going to bring to life a few examples and then show you where we're heading now. So this first example, it's distilled down into sort of a niche incident, per se, a bit like the one Guy mentioned at Brighton. This is just around the corner at Three Bridges, down in Sussex. I'll bring it to life with this, but think of, not only is this quite complex, but then you've got to scale it up for lots of different equipment types, lots of different failure types, and lots of different audiences. So this training manager might have 40 to 60 frontline manager customers to look after throughout the year. And in this particular example, sort of a bit like the Brighton example Guy mentioned, Three Bridges signalling section, they had the worst performance in a particular type of failure. So this signalling, the traffic lights on the track, if the relays fail, the traffic light stops working. And this one was the worst performance in the country and was costing Network Rail £1.1 million. That's money it has to pay to the train companies as a penalty. When the train companies have an error, they pay it the other way. So we thought, okay, let's delve into this as an example. And first of all, just quickly taking you through it, what are the competencies that link to that type of incident? You can see on the right, there's a number of them. They've all got these little, this is SIG for signals, and then a number of numbers. And the course that delivers those, in this example, fairly straightforward. It's Signalling Engineering Maintenance 2. It's not always as simple as that. There's many courses could deliver some or all of these courses, competences. So once we'd identified that, you could then start to leverage these tools and the analytics behind them to start predicting the benefit of increasing the training. There's obviously something going wrong here, and is there a link to the competence and training of the team? So by using the suite of tools on the bottom right, what we're able to say is, look, at the moment, you've only requested one person on this course, and it costs £3,200. Actually, we predict that you need 4 to 5 people. So as a business that sells training, you could argue it's a bit biased. Yeah, it's positive. We're going to sell more training. But what we're able to do here is, yeah, it costs more, but you start to see the benefits. So there's a particular measure we have about section capability. It brings them up to the national average. But importantly, we could start to predict we actually talk more in delay minutes, the amount trains are delayed, rather than the cost that there is. You can correlate it to cost. How much less train delay there would be, and in this example, how much less you might need to spend on labour-only subcontractors. And so by taking them through this, you can then say, right, okay, let's discuss that. The frontline manager might add some further context to it, domain knowledge, and ultimately then we can agree on this plan and implement it. And as I say, the complexity comes when you've got lots of different interventions and lots of different customers. But hopefully this brings to life that conversation has moved from what do you want, I don't know, I'm too busy, give me what I had last year, to one of, I've done the hard thinking for you, let me walk you through it, let's have a debate, there might be some challenge in there. So all those skills of providing an informed supplier service are really important to that frontline training manager. Okay, let's also look at an example for the training leaders. So each region, they have a senior representative that has a seat at the table of the heads of maintenance, heads of operations, heads of renewals, etc. And in the past, at best, if there was a particular problem or an issue, the training might not have even been considered as part of the root cause or part of the mitigation. At worst, they might have been blamed for it. It's that sort of the noise that Guy mentioned. What are you doing about this? The quickest thing to blame is frontline staff will say, I ain't got enough headcount and they ain't trained enough. So what this now enables them to do is strategically have a conversation about performance. And actually, it started to unearth business intelligence as well as training intelligence, which is really powerful. And it also does all the usual stuff of, hey, we can discuss volumes of demand and how much we've delivered and wastage. But actually, there's some really good analytics and insights here. So bring to life 2 quick examples. Real incident a couple of years ago. So this was the overhead power lines that you see in certain areas of the country. There'd been a dewirement. That's a real photo of it. You can just see the cable hanging down near Euston Station, just north of it. And without power, trains get blocked. The response to it was quite quick, but this led to disruption for actually 3 days. And what was particularly notable on it was just after a football match against Crystal Palace versus Watford. Lots of travellers, lots of rediverting to Euston, which then had problems with overcrowding. Euston is not optimally designed for large volumes of people. So this was a particularly, this was on the managing director's agenda for the week and the month. It was really, really serious. So let's look at it quickly. 21,000 delay minutes. That is massive. They are very rare, and it cost Network Rail £5.6 million in performance. So I used to work in Network Rail maintenance. I only ever had one that was around 20,000. Pretty career limiting. Okay? This is really bad performance. You can see quite an easy correlation here. So in order to maintain this sort of stuff, we were able to identify 2 courses run by Overhead Line Engineering Maintenance 3. Okay, so we've made that link. Great. We were then able to start looking at the training intelligence and, as I say, the business intelligence. And this allowed that training leader, to have a conversation that says, you know what, actually, training wasn't the root cause here. The team is actually pretty well trained, more so than most. And in the incident, the actual response bit, they performed really well. Good. So actually, let's not blame training in this incident. What it did also show was the engineering backlog, so that to-do list for this section, accounted for for this type of failure, 12.5% of the country's backlog. Bear in mind, this section only accounts for 7% of the assets. So they had an above-average backlog. They'd also had 3 incidents in the previous few months, but they'd gone under the radar because they weren't too painful. So actually, there's a big issue of, can we share this insight so you can look at actually how you're doing your work and the preventative maintenance. And we also identified a strategic workforce planning issue. There was no full-time frontline section manager for this team. No wonder they're having challenges. And what credit where credit lies, it also highlighted that course needed some updating, so there was that feedback loop. So straight away, this training leader was able to have a much more constructive conversation with that managing director and their senior team. Let's look at another quick one. This was down by Luton Airport, but this particular one, a signal, the traffic lights I mentioned, changed aspects, so changed from green to red at the wrong time. The train went past it and emergency brakes were applied. That's really dangerous. You can have 2 trains hit each other if that happens. It took a long time to be able to identify the fault, which is a faulty cable, and then a long time to replace the cable. They needed 380 meters of cable, no mean feat. So what happened here? Okay, 2,400 minutes of delay, that's still really bad, still 320k penalty. Identified the course, as you can see on the right. There was a lack of people there was a recommendation here, so, hands up, yes, that section needs more training. You can see the SIG 43, 7 more people to be trained, and it could quantify the predicted benefit. It also highlighted above average time since trained, and there's a hypothesis that says if it's been a long time since you've been trained in something, unless you're using that a lot, you could get quite rusty at it. And therefore, your response time and ability to identify the fault quickly and rectify it could be impacted. So it starts recommending rehearsal training, or pit stop training, as we call it. It also identified business impacts. So the team that kept on responding didn't have the right tools and equipment in the vehicle, and they kept having to go back to the depot. And could they or should they have had that? Quite possibly. And also, when they tried to get this cable drum, they needed someone else from a different team with the right forklift truck competency to get this cable off the shelf. So there's a whole recommendation on operational preparedness and resilience. So all of these conversations this training leader could then have with that managing director and their team to say, how do we collectively improve our response going forward? All of that we've looked at, that's technical stuff, technical skills. As Guy said, 80-90% of the training they do is around that technical space. But behaviours, as we said, is super, super important. So we've also explored that. So quickly bringing to life what we did here. So bearing in mind, academic theory says 80-90% of safety incidents have a behavioural causational factor. And because behaviours are by definition observable, we decided to try and look at qualitative data to see where behaviors may have caused a safety incident. So what this did was started to analyze lots of safety reports, investigation reports, etc., lots of free text, leveraged a number of analytical techniques. We trialed a number and settled on 5 different techniques, including natural language processing, to start to analyze what's happening in this team and the behaviors that might be causing that impact. And it started to produce some really interesting results in that actually it started to challenge and turn on the head what non-technical skills the business actually really thinks about. So it had a list, 18 or so, and the program started to prove that actually a lot of those, there's gaps in those competencies and there's overlap, so they're not what's called, MISI, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. So actually it starts to redefine what those non-technical skills might be. And going forward, the next challenge is, okay, can we then start to use that technique to predict negative behaviors that might lead to a safety incident before they occur? That's when you get into some really exciting worlds. So some really positive results starting to occur here. And then the last slide before I hand to Richard or take any questions is, it's also allowed the training team to create data science as a service almost, analytics as a service. So customers in the delivery team start saying, can you help me with this problem? Can you analyze this for me? So 3 examples. One of the regions is starting to look at the efficiencies of if you were to merge Network Rail's resources and capabilities with the train companies, and you can see some predicted efficiencies of doing that. And in a world of constrained cash, that's super important. Another route came to us and said, we think people are collecting certain safety-related competencies, partly because it leads to higher grade pay. And it's costing us an awful lot of money. Could you look at that? And what the analysis showed was 782 people weren't using that competency the minimum 6 times a year. In fact, 400 of them hadn't used it at all since they'd been trained. So not only is that really unsafe, it also wasted a lot of training money, 400K. And then during COVID, and it applies to strike action as well, analysing what key competencies you need, so signallers, response staff, to keep a railway open. And when do you start hitting thresholds that you need to start collapsing your branch lines and focusing on the main lines? This has even gone into the world of professional competencies. How do you prove that the teams have the right engineering professional competencies to sign off on interventions and construction? Hopefully that's been useful to describe what the program is and how it works. If there's any immediate questions just now, otherwise I'll take them at the end before I hand to Richard. I thought I'd get away with this.
How are you gathering data about those behaviors that you just mentioned? Are they self-reported, or how is it?
Say again, sorry?
How are you gathering data about those behaviors you were mentioning? Is it self-reported or other data sources?
Yeah, so unfortunately in the behavior space, the data, the reporting mechanisms, so you've got the Rail Accident Investigation Branch, they write long reports, and at the end there's some indicators of causational factors and underlying factors. You've got safety management information system. Unfortunately, they're not designed yet to have lots of drop-down menus that say what went wrong. That would be great. It's all free text. So it was applying those analytical techniques about, okay, so you might have a 100-page accident investigation report. How do you use NLP techniques to start to bring out those correlations, the thematic analysis, that then starts to analyze and predict the correlation between those? So it's about 5 different techniques that are quite complex within that, but it's thematic analysis in essence. Any others?
Well, it looks very impressive. So I guess that you've done this all by yourself in 1 or 2 or 3 days, or I mean.
Well, in terms of how long this took.
Yeah.
So it's been a long journey, 4 years, as Guy was saying. It's not all been happy and rosy. There's been successes. We've gone down rabbit holes and turned out that data doesn't match with that. Can't prove this correlation. Some of the analytic techniques work better than others, but also, as I say, some real challenges in the engagement of the people. So upskilling the users in the training world, educating the customers about why this is the right thing to do. Richard will talk more about this in a second. So yeah, there's plenty more to do, and it's not been plain sailing. I think it's been an enjoyable exploration, might be the best way to say it, and it doesn't work without the input of stakeholders both within training, but the wider business, both from a funding point of view, but also that contextual domain input. So yeah, really hard, definitely not 3 days' work. Anthony, we've got a microphone just from the back. Richard's breathing a sigh of relief, he gets less time to talk.
Well, if you could just answer all of my presentation through questions, then I don't need to go.
Had any of your analytics an impact on the content of the trainings? So was there a feedback loop in terms of, oh, you've seen blah, 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 training X, Y, Z, didn't deliver the performance, so we had to adapt the content? Was there also feedback in the content?
Yes, yeah, so one of those examples I showed indicated in that OLE course there was a potential to revise it. Definitely more to be done in that space. So the core purpose of it doesn't necessarily feed back to the training material per se, but actually it allows then, Guy mentioned, instead of a scattergun approach, sort of, really focusing on things. So if there's been a major incident and training, either the volume of the training of the staff or the application of that competence starts to come under questioning, then it allows people to start looking at the material and revising it and such like. In a previous career, we had a safety instance in London Waterloo. There was an electric shock incident, and actually what it showed was the engineering standards behind it needed up-revving in a similar way because they contradicted one another. So by this analytical approach, you can start to identify it.
Thank you. It sounds super, super interesting. I think one of the biggest challenges that a lot of organisations face when it comes to learning analytics is data quality. So I'm just interested, especially because you said that it's live data that's being pulled into these. How do you ensure that the data is accurate and valid, so you're not blindly leading people down the wrong path in terms of training that's being then suggested?
Yeah, great question. I mean, one of the risks is, especially as live data, if you're constantly trying to chase the tail of what happened yesterday, you could make interventions that are based on too short a data point. So the good news is in the rail industry, these data sets go back a very long time. That's how we did some of these coefficients of the link between training and impact of. The data, the Azure platform I mentioned, updates itself automatically. It used to be manual. We had to eventually build it so it would do it automatically, pull on these data sets. But it is really hard. So if you, without going into too much detail, 2 key data sets, the failure data set, called failure management system. You need to work out who owned that asset. And in 50% of the instances, it will give a reference number for an asset, and the asset you can track to an owner, but the owner isn't always responsible for the failure mode. It could be a different discipline. So you start off with this huge volume of data, and very quickly have to start scoring it out, and at some point you will get to the point of, is it then statistically relevant? And we have hit dead ends where we've gone, it would have been great to do that if only the data and the systems that collate the data were better. Okay, dead end, let's move somewhere else. And that helped us to choose the different metrics that we measured over time, because there's so many different things you could track. Richard's definitely not getting any time, is he?
I'm particularly interested in the impact on the business intelligence and impact on organizational culture, the appetite for learning and, to getting more information. Have you observed that, your employees, as your customers, yeah? How, did the analytics influence that?
Well, that's a nice segue, so thank you.
Allows me to escape.
I can talk about that now, so that's what we're going to go on to. So we've heard about the why, and we've heard about what we've done. So what's actually happened in the business as a result of it is what I'm just going to touch on. And what were some of the barriers we faced culturally from a business change perspective. So on the screen here, we've got the position of the tool today. What is the art of the possible? If everything in the whole system worked perfectly, this is what we could achieve for the railway. Have we achieved it? Not yet, okay? If the finance director is in the room, we have got ROI, don't worry. But we haven't achieved this yet, okay? And why is that? Well, I think there's a number of reasons why. The first is that what's become really clear to us is that this is a journey, okay? When we started this 4 years ago, I think there was part of us that thought, right, we'll create the tool, we'll produce the answer, we'll deliver the answer, job done. And that has not been the case. And there's a number of areas that we've really had to take on this journey with us. The first, and actually sometimes the most difficult, has been our own team. So our customer account managers that work with the front line, our learning developers, our people who create the demand and plan the training. They've done their business in the same way for the last 10, 20 years. And we've come along with some data that perhaps challenges some of what they've been delivering. And it's difficult for anyone to face a reality that says, actually, perhaps there's a better way of doing what you do today. So we've had to take our users on that journey. We've had to take our customers on that journey, because equally, they've been doing things the way they've been doing things. Some stuff's been the same since the Victorian times. So the railway is an old organisation, and as Guy mentioned, there's lots of legacy stuff and lots of new stuff. We've also had to actually completely transform our relationship with our a bit of the organisation that looks after technology and looks after data, okay? Because we've come along and we found holes in some of the data, holes in some of the IT processes, and again, overcome some of those barriers of actually, we're training. You may see us as a bit of a back office enabling part of the organisation, but we're coming to you and actually saying, we could be performance critical here. If you change the way you manage your data, change the way you manage your processes, we can add value right into passengers on trains getting to where they need to go on time. And finally, there's been a journey in the actual tool itself, and we've tried really complex user interfaces to try and make it accessible to as many people as possible. We've tried very raw data interfaces that require lots of manual intervention and lots of business knowledge to interpret that, and everything in between. And actually we found that there needs to be a bit of flexibility in that. Some people might need the rawer data in order for them to trust and understand what the system is telling them. Others just want to click a button and have the answer given to them. And so that, for us, has been an interesting journey to explore where along that line do we need to be, with who, when, how current does the data need to be? Because there's probably 4 things that I'd pull out of this slide. One is it's a journey. 2 is the level of simplicity has to be right for the person that you're dealing with. 3 is that trust, it needs to be earned, okay? The tool, just because it's right, doesn't necessarily have the trust over somebody who's got 10 years, 20 years of experience, right? So that trust has to be earned. And that has to be earned by being right and not being undermined by trying to be too clever for its own good in places. So we've learned that lesson in places the hard way. And actually, at the end of this, the 4th thing is if we don't influence the decision-making process within the organisation, then actually we're not hitting the mark. So we've got to actually get to the point where the person who's the decision maker within the business goes, yeah, okay, I accept, we're going to do this as a result, or we're going to change this, we got that bit wrong, or this bit's going really well and we want to invest more in that bit. Okay, so it's got to get to the point of a decision maker. And those for me are the 4 big business change learning points. It's a journey, manage the expectations, get the level of complexity versus simplicity right, build the trust, and get to the decision makers. And sometimes that might be with an automated dashboard, but actually a lot of the time we're finding that the best conversations are still person to person, but just armed much more effectively with the right information for that conversation. Now, where are we going next? Because as Guy mentioned, all the stuff we've done so far has just uncovered all the questions we haven't answered yet on all the exciting next steps that we could do. And what we're doing in this training intelligence program is not in isolation. We've got a series of transformation programs happening in Network Rail that support training. So we're also investing heavily in virtual environments, digital twins. We're investing heavily in our data architecture and our enterprise systems that support our service day to day. Both Johnny and Guy have mentioned the fact that we've realized how critical the behavioral elements of our training and the non-technical skills are. On top of this, we've got a big change program to really make our service as good as it can be for our devolved regional customers. And actually where we want to get to is that holy grail of we're predicting what we need in the right time frame for effective decisions to happen. And we've got a strategy to cover all that. And I think the next steps for us is to actually look at how we take the analytics tools that we have and capability that we have now and start to look at what other data is out there that we can ingest, what other correlations can we make. So for example, using digital twins for training, we can start to get actual haptic feedback from our delegates using the digital simulation, see how confident they are in pressing buttons. Have they hesitated when they've pulled a lever and things like that? And that can really start to give us a whole new data set in the behavioral space. In terms of our technology platforms, there was a joke about LXPs versus LMSs earlier. One of the things that we definitely want to improve on is our LXP and really around getting that feedback from our customers, from our delegates, from the business, and feeding that into the process as well, moving on from the tick box, was your sandwiches good, and that side of things. So in our mind, we're at the point where, yes, we're delivering benefits, but actually we've seen there's a whole new world out there that we've now unlocked with this, what I would say, step one in a journey, and a whole exciting journey to continue on with. The backdrop in the rail industry, for those of you who aren't aware, the rail industry is going through quite a big political level change, shifting to Great British Railways, looking at how we make the industry much more efficient, much more service focused, and we think this has a massive part to play in helping shape what does our workforce in the future GBR structure look like. Where should we be targeting our precious funding, resources, etc. So thinking about organizational structure, organizational capability on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we're investing really heavily as an industry in digitizing our entire infrastructure. So our signaling systems, creating tools that help prevent predictive maintenance and such like. And what we're seeing in that space is that the pace of change is such that our traditional feedback mechanisms for training just can't possibly keep up. Okay, we've gone from building a bridge where the competence lasts 25 years to a bit of digital software where it could be changing every 6 months or 6 weeks in the worst case scenario. How does our training system keep up with that? Well, this is critical to that. Getting that real-time feedback from our delegates, from our customers, working with our suppliers and the original equipment manufacturers to build feedback directly into our analytics is the holy grail here. So we're going to be exploring that over the coming years. So I think that takes us to the end of the presentation. So just to summarize then everything we've gone through so far, this is really about taking training for us away from being about competence, away from being a tick box exercise potentially in some places, to actually we're providing real-time performance and safety improvements to our frontline and ultimately to our passengers. It's about us taking ownership of what does the industry need in terms of capability, what does it need to do to be fit for purpose in order to maintain and operate the railway. And actually, the final point is the technology is where we really focused on initially, and we realized that actually it's probably only a third of the challenge. The business change and the wider data and technology landscape are the other two pillars really. And you really need to have a good balance across all three of those to get to the right place. That's us.
Okay, fantastic. So we are going to open the floor up to any questions that haven't already been answered. So anybody has something, raise your hand and we shall dash over. Here we go.
Hi, thank you very much. My question is about the quality of the data you're using and whether or not you've spent any time putting into place data governance models, sort of data stewards, all of that kind of good stuff. And if so, how have you done it and have you been successful? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll try and give that one a quick response. So
Yeah, as I say, there's a lot of these different systems. They're certainly not integrated. They've grown over time, decades. And if they were used perfectly, they wouldn't actually be too bad. But as I say, there's option. The example I used about failure modes, it's optional to tag the asset number, and if you had that, you could track it to the right people. So there is a feedback mechanism. Some of that feedback on the safety management system, there's a new version coming out, so we've been able to provide feedback to the owners of that. That's actually owned by the Rails Safety Standards Board. But yeah, one of the challenges, different owners across NetRail's 40,000 staff, the rail industry's 240,000. Lots of different people own those data sets, so it is really hard. But part of the wider journey is feeding that to the owners and encouraging them to do things with it. At the tactical level, what are the sort of proxies you can use to work around it? Sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. So.
I think just to add to that, there's the data that's ingested, which is obviously, but there's the data that comes out as well, is data that we've created then as an organisation. And I think there's a challenge in continuously improving that. And I think I've used the word journey a lot, but I think it is a journey because the first iterations of that data, perhaps not as accurate, need more business input, need to be verified against the reality on the ground. And what we're seeing is that data is now really maturing, the correlations that it draws are getting better, and that will continue to improve year on year.
I'm just curious now, obviously you're very proud of what happened so far, and you've got a plan where you wanted to go. Do you work with other organizations and benchmark what you're doing against the others? Because some of the safety experiments this happened with Boeing, for example, where we become ignorant, and we're very happy what we achieved, and we're the best in the business. Yeah, clearly we've done it well. So I just wonder how this is happening for you.
Simple answer is no. But what we have done as part of developing this program, we did quite a large-scale set of visits to various other industries and organisations to see where they are on this journey. And I think that the thing we took away from that is where various industries were, we just need to have a stab at it ourselves and see where we get to. I think there wasn't a lot out there when we started this journey 4 years ago to say, actually, that's a good benchmark to aim for in this space. So I think we've had to learn a lot of hard lessons. I think throughout this program. But I think other industries are catching up now. That we're not the only ones now. But at the time, it did feel like we were probably the only ones trying to take on this challenge.
I think there are some intrinsic aspects to the rail industry that enabled us to get going on it, because first of all, access to data is always closely guarded, and people put their hands around it and say, what do you want it for? The railway has its challenges, but it tends to be one big family, and therefore it didn't take too much to persuade people to give you live access to their data, and I think that trust bit, through all of this extends in so many different ways to get there. And I think the other aspect is that we, one aspect of being a safety critical industry is that you gather vast quantities of data, right? So we had plenty of different data areas to pick from to try and find something that would be a suitable marker for competence, right? Whereas I think in other areas where things are a bit lighter in the data pickup, you've got a bit more of a journey to go on to find those original links.
I think what's really interesting for me is, although it's improving, if you go downstairs, most of the stands are talking about technology at the point of use, so VR, AR, CMSs, etc. Certainly when the journey started and Guy and Richard sort of identified the notion, no one else was looking at that upstream bit. I think it's a matter of time. We hope the lessons that have been learnt here allow others to follow and much more rapidly, because actually, whether you're using Microsoft Azure, other providers are available, whatever the technology stack one uses and the data you've got, the principles I think are transferable.
Any more questions?
A question that focuses more on assessments, actually. I just was wondering, do you build assessments in an online tool that allows you to correlate performance in assessments against recorded job defects? And if yes, when people do not pass assessments, can they go and continue working, or they need to complete again the training and assessments and pass?
And the resets, isn't it?
Yeah, so we have a number of assessment regimes. So those that are for our most safety critical areas, you know, down to the less safety critical areas. And if you're operating in any of the safety critical environments, the assessment is managed through a whole set of standards, which include an online tool. And no, you can't access our infrastructure if you fall out of competence or you don't pass your assessment. So we have an authority to work system. It essentially doesn't allow you into a work site unless you are competent to go into that work site. It's for our most safety critical. It's not a, you know, it's quite an expensive process to manage. So we don't put everything into that system. So it's about what is right for that level of regime. And we're constantly juggling what goes into that regime and what doesn't fit. And we can gather the data into the system from that assessment.
Interestingly, linking it to the presentation, one of the headaches 3 years ago, 2 of the systems weren't talking. So one system that tracks all competencies, then the separate system, there's the on-site access point, and there was a discrepancy occurring between them. And at best, that means someone turns up and can't do the job they intended to. At worst, it allows someone to do something who shouldn't. So actually, this analytics as a service allowed the organisation to mitigate that and work out an exception report whilst then the back end was fixed. So that sort of ties with that very last slide that I brought up.
Fabulous. I think we've got time for one more if there's any more. Yep.
Well, I must say I'm very impressed with the presentation and the content, and I'm really excited to see all this. I mean, you have had a hell of a journey. So I've got basically 2 questions. One question is, what was in that journey the best celebration you had, and which fuck up did you have? Just for fun's sake.
Increase in spending.
So, I'd say the first thing, I'm not saying this is the sole contributor to it, but it is a big contributor to it. And that is that I've seen a significant increase in the budgets that the business is prepared to commit a lot more resources. So the managing director I spoke to has doubled their spend on L&D, all right, because we can have that conversation. They're interested in talking about performance, not about HR, all right? So by changing your dialogue, they go, well, they understand our business. Yeah, we'll spend more. Right. And the worst...
Oh, you're looking to me for that. I think we mentioned we went on lots of different sort of tangential journeys, and I think that the biggest lesson for us at one point, we really dug in too heavily on a certain group of end users in allowing them to shape what the product looked like. And we then realized actually they're reinforcing what we do today into a system that we're, you know, so that for us was a realization of actually it's good to get the end user input, but it's got to be balanced with a strategic vision of where you want to take things. And sometimes, you know, you have to reshape the user, sometimes you have to reshape the tool, sometimes you have to reshape the data, and not necessarily to get drawn in too heavily into any one of those as being the solution to save all.
They were good people, very, very good people, massively invested in providing a great service. But they were the people that really had those face-to-face conversations and often bore the brunt when people were unhappy. They were more cautious about the adventure that we were on.
I think from my perspective, the biggest headache would be when the maths doesn't work. So often the maths doesn't lie, but the thing that kept me awake at night was when suddenly actually we get some feedback that a piece of analytics is giving the wrong answer, or in the complex Python code, there's actually hidden in there, there's an error that's skewing, this is really difficult maths, right? And it's not been done before. And then you have to learn from the errors and work back, and it takes 2 weeks to go, I found it, that kind of thing.
Can't remember that.
Yeah, and it's that keeps me awake at night, and I'm ringing up Guy and falling on my sword sort of thing. But there's scary times on it, but actually, working as a team, it allows trying to keep the stakeholders on side and trying to work through it and understanding that it's an exploration.
Because sometimes we made a promise in all truth, and then we come back and go, ooh, 90% of that was right, but that thing we thought was fantastic isn't quite what we thought. And we had to sometimes be prepared to wheel back a little bit on what we thought. And it was, I would always describe it as a journey was, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back in what you're trying to do.
It's been a little while since we reminded the other 3 theatres that they were in the wrong place. So I think just to wrap up, you hear that? That was like a leg by a village cricket match. It was pathetic, right? So just to say thanks to the guys, I want you to just go absolutely wild and crazy. Give her a big, huge round of applause, and thank you very much. Woo!